Politics. Ugh. In Shakespeare's Henry IV, the young rascal Prince Hal grows into the hero king Henry V. In the process, he needs to shed the influence of his bastard friend Falstaff, the old knight turned rogue. Shakespeare had the insight that the needs of power can't allow roguishness. In medieval times, with the Christian hegemony, there was a vertical logic of power. There was the hierarchy of the church, but within this system of power there was room for grotesque carnivalistic exuberance. Within the logic of vertical power, the highness of the office demanded the purity of its executioners. Meanwhile, the people who lived on the streets and in the fields, at the bars and at the town square, there was allowed a certain flexibility because of the freedom from high office. And during festivals and other such celebrations, there was allowed a certain rowdiness, drunkenness, even among clergy and within the church. The work I'm drawing on for this information is the book Rabelais and His World by the Soviet academic Mikhail Bakhtin. And Rabelais was himself a priest who wrote this absurd, grotesque insult to any liberal conception of standards. According to Bakhtin, Rabelais was unpopular during the 18th century in France because of the highly centralized form of royal and public power. Voltaire thought that, except from flashes of genius, it was trash. I think something happened with this type of vertical structure of power at some point. I think it's got with the seismic shift of values during the French Revolution. From the vertical structure of medieval times, we now have a somewhat horizontal structure. Now we see each other as equals. We're all worthy of representation in government. Even the right-wing fascist governments say they are representatives of the people. But I think that there's this idea that the leader of a people must be not just a person. Simone Weil was obsessed with the idea of self-extinction as the highest form of purity. The genius isn't the one who's the most personal. The genius is the one who can make himself extinct within his or her work. They become the work. I think there is something similar within the confines of democracy, at least the liberal bourgeois democracy of the 20th and 21st century. For a politician to be effective, I think, there needs a certain need for themselves to be absent, not in the technocratic sense of lacking all values. What is needed, I think, is for the politician to be able to channel the will of the people. The greatest presidents of the US, I dare say, are George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, and Franklin Roosevelt. Why? I think that they uniquely managed to stand as vessels of projection. They were folksy yet intensely intelligent. These managed to make the American people feel not as comfortable subjects of an elite class, but agents of change themselves. There's more to dig into here, to discuss how this works and why it works like it. The kind of demand that this type of mass psychology in the framework of the nation-state, bourgeois democracy. I think that Trump and Biden, the two American presidential candidates in the US 2020 presidential election, Trump actually accomplishes this better. It could be easy to say that's because Biden sucks and he's a corporate neolib who doesn't care about people. But it's more difficult than that. Barack Obama is a corporate neolib who doesn't advocate for policies that advance the interests of working people, but is also massively popular. That's the trick, huh? Be massively handsome and uniquely charismatic. But I think there's two branches of how to accomplish this. I think that Obama managed the difficult task of becoming the symbol of the state. And that is one part of becoming this idea of the leader of a people. But he missed the other part. For a politician to succeed, I think, he needs to both stand as a symbol of the state, yes, but also as a symbol of the people. That is the other branch. The need to be both inside and outside the halls of power. They need to be government for the people, by the people, to use the American phrase. Obama, I think, was president by the people, but not for the people. And that's his tragedy. If we return for a moment to Weiss' definition of genius, the person who destroys every trace of themselves in his or her work, and use this working method to understand the success of a politician, we understand one thing clearly. It's metaphysics. This isn't just the case for progressive politicians such as Franklin Roosevelt. Look at Winston Churchill in the UK or Charles de Gaulle in France. If we contrast this to the self-image of medieval monarchies that we talked about earlier in the context of the church, there it is God, usually, who gives the mandate of power. There is no need for a relationship between the monarch and the people, and the structures are that of familial relations. The king has vassals who is loyal to the king, and the vassals have tax collectors or something who are loyal to the vassals, and the people pay taxes and get on with their lives. If there's a breach in this social contract, the monarch is replaced. But this is also how rebellion is crushed. If just one small part of the whole is dissatisfied, there isn't enough to build opposition. There in the end isn't actually any metaphysics to the mandate of royal power in this sense. It's a coherent social system. But with the development of liberal democracy, there was a need to equalize power. Theoretically, politicians ought to be people like everyday people. And the idea is that you and I could become politicians. This creates the balance where there needs to be a relationship between the politician and the democratic citizen. If this relationship doesn't work, it doesn't really matter what the politician accomplishes in terms of legislation. Or at least, it matters less what legislation is passed. Again, this is more or less the difference between the two branches. The representative of the people and the representative of the state. Walt Disney knew that his image was just an image. The image of Disney didn't drink or smoke or swear, but Walt did all of those bad things. He knew that for the idea he wanted to work, there needed to be a difference between who he seemed to be and who he was. Disney, the image, wasn't a genius. He was a kindly old man. But Walt, the producer, was by all accounts an asshole. So again, we have the double nature of greatness as found within the politician. There needs to be a public image that one can project onto. But there also needs to be a person who understands the conditions of his or her work. There needs to be a public face and a private interior. This isn't the same thing as Hillary Clinton giving talks to bankers for outrageous fees. Every politician you've ever liked has been like this. Bernie Sanders is like this. Oh, I look forward to the radicalization to the left of Bernie when he starts dealing with centrists. Or AOC. But there is also the other side of the coin. Look at Elon Musk. I remember a few years ago when he still wasn't the clown he is now. There was still a way to admire the insanity of his ideas. But look at him now, or at least somewhat recently. This is the stupidest take I've ever seen. Or the time he smoked weed on Joe Rogan. What makes Musk different from, let's say, Steve Jobs? Steve Jobs was also an asshole by all accounts. But he was a different kind of asshole. He didn't smoke weed in public. I think Musk is probably a pretty chill dude to hang out with. With him, what you see is what you get. Meanwhile, with Steve Jobs, as with Walt Disney, I think there is this duality of public persona versus private work ethic. I think this is the dynamic that you have with any brilliant person who is also successful. If you want to reach genius, you need humility before your own ability, at least in public. When it comes to the discussion of the relationship between liberal democracy and socialism, there are obvious tensions. The obsession of the citizen as an idea belongs with the bourgeois. A socialist ought to look at the material conditions and analyze the dynamics of power through the underlying economic forces. Right? The reason materialist analysis is a thing is because of these idealistic ideas that lie embedded in liberal democracy, isn't it? Yeah, I've had this thought that the reason socialists sometimes have a hard time dealing with democracy is this exact point. While liberals cherish idealism, socialists reject it. And in this sense, socialists are closer to how I describe the medieval idea of social structures. In liberal democracy, the idea is based on a shared idea of citizenship. Whereas in socialism, we want a society based not on ideas, but on a coherent social system. A society where we relate to each other not as rational agents on the free market, but as individuals. A society where we relate to each other not as rational agents on a free market, but as individuals. The difference between monarchism is that it's in the end not really built on relational dependency, but on the whims of the powerful. So is it impossible to build socialism within liberal democracy? I don't think so. I get the impression a lot of the time that socialists and communists, being not a tiny bit idealistic themselves, there's in my experience hard to get concrete answers, like how would society look without a state? Maybe it's my bougie flaws coming through, but I can't imagine a society, however anarchist, without some level of public bureaucracy. And if it's just a tiny night watchman state, what's essentially the difference from a libertarian definition of the state? How would society look like without a police force? How would courts work, or are they abolished? Just telling me workers will own the means of production doesn't tell me any practical detail of how society should be run. I think one of the problems of the US is that they, as they say, are a people ruled by laws, not men. This is because I think power comes not from documents but from people as a matter of practical reality. But even in a stateless society there need to be laws, right? If I were to fantasize, I would consider some kind of state-level government where international trade and business is handled, with more local self-contained communities below. In the end, what I'm getting at, people, is that I think socialism must be a continuation and development of liberal democracy, not a dismantling of it. The most important lesson I've learned during my years as politically active in some sense is that the community socialists want isn't the state. The state is the tool for change, and the state by necessity is conservative. Which is why progressive change is hard and scary. The community is the party, or the movement. But the basic point is this. Transition from capitalism to socialism is not easy, but it is also necessary if we believe in democracy. And one of the many points to be considered for the basis of our socialist society is to consider these metaphysics of liberal democracy that stands in the way. Liberal democracy stands as the middle ground in a process of development, from the hierarchical society of medieval monarchies to a truly horizontal society. Hello, I'm trying to kickstart my channel a bit. Please subscribe if you like this video or any other of my content, and please hit that subscribe button. I recently started a Patreon if you want to support me a bit more. You'll get posts about my process, and on the highest tier you'll get monthly streams as well. I just need to figure out how to do that. The link to my Patreon is in the description. So again, please subscribe and so on. It would mean the world to me.